For 50 some odd years and a little persuasion from my family, I've decided to tell a little bit about what my life was like as a soldier back during the Second World War, in the hopes that maybe some of my descendants would be interested in hearing about it. You would have an advantage. If you're not interested, you can turn it off. The ones living have had to listen to me or whatever. Back in 41, when Japan attacked America, stabbed us in the back, I hope you folks never have to see such a time. America was mad, and we had just right to be. At the time, of course, a lot of men rushed to enlist. I didn't right at the moment. I thought the thing over. I was not working to home at the time. My father had a large enough farm that I could have come home and went on the farm and been exempt as farm labor because of the need of, they knew the need of food was going to be. Well, I finally elected not to do that, so in April of 42, I joined the Air Force. I had always wanted to fly an airplane. I enlisted in the Air Force, hopefully, for a pilot. At that time, I passed everything except the color test. I could not pass that. So I was in the Air Force as a buck private. I was sent to Miami Beach as a place to disperse the soldiers to wherever, whatever they were going to be in. I took an aptitude test and qualified for radio, was sent to Scott Field Radio School, and graduated as a radio op, of course thinking that I would be a ground operator. From there, I was sent to Atlantic City to spend a winter there. That was a miserable darn place to spend the winter. All we done was horse close order drill, exercises, and so on. And the weather was cold, wet, and miserable. We slept at the best of hotels. Of course, they had taken the beds and so on. We had to sleep in army cots. From there, I was put on overseas orders. 500 of us were loaded on a train and sent to Halifax, Nova Scotia, to board a ship which was loaded primarily with Canadian soldiers, just us 500 Yankees. The name of the ship was Andrea. It was a French ship, a very modern ship. It had been in an English port at the time France capitulated, and the English had taken it over and used it as a troop transport. It did not travel in convoy, which most ships did at that time due to submarines. This was in April of 43. Well, we left the port alone. Through this ship's speed, we were going to travel alone. We pulled out of Halifax on the 8th of April. I can't remember just exactly, but it seems to me they claimed it took something like 7 minutes for a submarine to sight and fire a torpedo. So every 5 minutes, this ship changed direction. And if there ever was a mean piece of water, as far as I'm concerned, it's that North Atlantic between Halifax, Nova Scotia, and Liverpool, England. We were on that ocean 7 days, getting across to Liverpool, and the wind blew constantly. It rained quite a little of the time, but as far as I'm concerned, the waves were monstrous. Now I suppose to a sailor or something in a hurry, see them in a hurricane, they weren't. But it was a miserable, wet, cold trip. And wall-to-wall sick soldiers. Now, I remember one night they said it was a submarine scare. They got us out, it was raining slightly, and we had to stay by the lifeboat. I don't remember just how long, but it was quite a little of the night. It was raining a little, and the waves was hitting the side of the ship. The spray would go over us. We were wet and cold and thick. That was a miserable night. Till I got to thinking about this, I'd almost forgot it, but I remember it quite well now. Well, we finally got to Liverpool a week later. I always remembered there was a bunch of seagulls flying away around, and of course we were all out sitting around on the deck to take our first look at England, and some darn seagull had a call of nature right above me, and it hit me right beside the nose. I never did live that down. Well, we were sent to this dispersal area there in England. We were all of us, none of us assigned. We were replacements. I was shipped to the 44th Bomb Group, the 68th Squadron, assigned to that. They were a B24 outfit, 1st Division, 2nd Division of the 8th Air Force. And of course I was sent to the radio shack as a ground radio operator. It looked like a pretty boring war. Well, one of the first aerial radio ops I seen wore glasses somewhere in the vicinity, even half an inch thick, I should think, from the looks of them. And I asked him how in the world he got on an airplane with glasses that thick. He said, there's a war on over here. They aren't so interested in minor things. They need men. There was a lot of men in the Army at that time, the Air Force and so on, but most of them were stateside. And flying personnel was a little scarce over there. So I went and took a test, physical, for aerial radio op, and I passed everything except the color test, and I suppose when I flunked that, why I was out again. And like I say, there was a war on over there. We're sending you to gunner school, you aerial radio. So we were sent down on the Wash. A few other guys had signed up for aerial combat. We went through radio school, learned to fire a 50 caliber machine gun, and were sent back to the base. Okay, shut it off.
This is the 31st of January, 1994. Set and rolling.
I should mention this time that flying or submarine was all voluntary. They could not draft you to fly or ride the submarine. And you could quit at any time by simply going to the medics and saying that your nerves were shot, you couldn't take it anymore. Now, there were some guys that did that, although they were somewhat frowned on. Of course, you lost your wings and your rank. As soon as you flew a mission, you were automatically made a buck private. The reason for that was if you were shot down and taken prisoner, by the Geneva Convention, the enemy could work anybody under a buck private, which would be a help to the war effort. So you were automatically a buck private. How much higher you went from there was up to you. So I was moved to combat barracks, went on combat mess, which was worth taking a chance of fighting in order to get on combat mess, because combat mess was good. We got good ration. We got eggs, meat, and so on. Ground mess at that time was not good. At that time, a lot of shipping was going down, a lot of American food and so on sent to the GIs wasn't getting there. So we were on limey rations, ground personnel was, most of the time, and that was primarily cabbage and mutton. And the reason that we were fed much better was because of the fact of what we had to stand at altitude. There was no pressurized cabins then. we just had to take the altitude, and we flew at anywhere from 18 to 27, 8,000 feet, and the cold was terrible. That's why we were fed better. I was signed on to a crew as assistant radio op, left waist gunner, a man by the name of Lenhausen, who was the pilot, and I flew my first mission. I don't remember exactly what the name of the town was that we went to that time. It was in Germany. Anyhow, I seen my first wall of flak and first fighters and seen my first bombers go down. And at that time, we weren't a lot of bombers there. I think probably at that time we were flying, probably there was 75 to 125 bombers and no fighter escort. The high brass hadn't dummied up at that time that they ought to send fighter escort with us. I don't know what the fighters were doing. I guess sitting around mostly. It was not that I'm saying anything against the fighter pilots or anything. It was no fault of theirs. They, like us, in the Army, you took orders. It was quite a jolt. I'd see a bomber go down, and maybe 2 or 3 shoots. Sometimes they'd be maybe as many as 10 shoots. And sometimes on a direct hit would explode, especially if we was on the way in, still had the bomb load on. There'd be no shoots. When they got back, I was pretty well shook up. But we lost a couple that day, as I remember. I don't think it was over 2. I don't remember exactly how many of us went from the 44th on that first mission. Probably not over 15, 16 of us. Of course, we'd go up and meet other groups of the 8th Air Force and form in formation. The reason for the formation, of course, is so the gunners, we had more firepower from the guns. Each bomber carried a total of 10 50 caliber machine guns and 6 gunners. 15 rounds to the gun. So we could put up quite a lot of fire ourselves. But still, we had to stay in formation. The bombers at that period of time were slow. In real good flying conditions, with 3 ton on, we could hit about 300 miles an hour. The fighters could hit around 5. And they had somewhat of an advantage, although we didn't do too bad knocking them down. Well, then as near as I can remember, I flew at least one more mission with Lenhausen, and maybe 2. Then I was put on another plane, Went, his name was, and we were sent, I flew there as left waist gunner, and I might mention a guy by the name of James Mickey. Our Army careers had been very similar. We both went to radio school, known one another and so on, been good friends. He did not come out too good on taking code. He could take code, but 15 words a minute was pretty much his limit. At that time, I could take 20 with ease, which you had to pretty much to be a first stop. At least you ought to be able to. If I concentrated real hard and reception was good, I sometimes could take up to 25. I was naturally wanting a first radio berth, because at the moment there wasn't any open, because it held more rank and was a much better position to fly. You flew on the flight deck, flying waist gun. The window was about 3 feet square each. They were side by side with a flexible 50 caliber machine gun. And the cold was terrible. At times, especially during the winter, altitude that we was at, it'd be as high anywhere from 20 to 30 below, plus the wind and the prop wash from the props. Came back in there. The chill factor, I have no idea what it was. It had to have been terrible. And it was a miserable position to fly. The only way, of course, that we could stand it those times, we had what we called electric suits. We put on long underwear. Then we put on this electric suit, which was more or less very similar to a set of long underwear, except it was electrically heated. Then we had gloves, electric gloves that we put on and hooked onto this suit and shoes. Over that, we wore what they called flight coveralls. They were a light pair of coveralls. Then us who flew in the waist, the tail gunner, he had an awful cold spot. We wore fleece-lined pants and fleece-lined jacket, a helmet and goggles, and of course our oxygen mask. There wasn't a spot of bare skin showing on it, and it was a good thing. Of course, at that time, as I say, no pressurized cabins. You had to wear oxygen. Army regulations was you put on oxygen mask at 10,000 feet, and you didn't take it off till you got below 10,000 feet. At that time, they was what they called the old type oxygen mask. They had a ball hung down below them to catch the moisture from your breath. You had to keep squeezing that once in a while to keep the ice busted up in it, or sometimes they would freeze up and shut your oxygen off. That happened on occasion. It never did to me, but it did to some other guys. I've heard them, they'd discover they were getting pretty sleepy, and they'd discover they hadn't got their oxygen mask unfrozen. I did have I'll tell that a little bit later, an oxygen freeze-up once and went unconscious. Well, I didn't have an oxygen freeze-up, but quit working. And then Mickey and I he was flying right waist gun while I was flying left. We were fighting back to back. And we got along pretty dash good. Well, then there was went on at this time. I don't remember just how many I flew with went. I think probably there in England only one, because with that at the time they was come up with this idea of the Pulaski oil field raid. I won't bother to describe that. If you're interested, it's in the history books about that raid and how it was done. It would take too much time here for me to go through the whole thing. If you're interested, you can look it up in the history books. If you aren't, the hell with it. But anyhow, I'm going to tell you that that summer, we spent a good deal of the time practicing low level bombing mission. This Pulaski oil field was going to have to be flown at low level in order to get any bombers to it. If they flew at altitude, the radar would pick them up and the Germans would clobber them the length of distance it was. So a good deal of the summer, the 44th was not flying very many missions. We were practicing for this Pulaski oil field raid. Well, I don't remember just exactly when it was they took off, but they took off a summer ago. We did not, my crew did not go. We didn't go. I don't know exactly why. That's the Army. The crews that went, they went. They went to Africa to fly out of Africa. They went to, the base was outside of Benghazi, North Africa, where they went, and they flew the Pulaski oil field raid, which they took a terrible pounding. It was pathetic. Like I say, I didn't fly on it, so I can't describe it. All I can tell you is what the fellows said when they got back, who did fly on it and did get back, and a lot of them didn't. And most of those that didn't were killed because they were going in at low altitude. They never had a chance to bail out. I later met one of the fellows who bailed out on that mission in prison. He told me he bailed out, yanked the ripcord. There was a jerk of the parachute stopping him, and the next thing his feet hit the ground. He was that close to the ground. He was very fortunate. But he said he saw men that were dead. Their parachute was pulled. The silk was laying there, but they were too close to the ground, and they hit the ground and were killed. And there was ground forces. The Germans had got word of it. They were expecting it. I've heard someone say that there was shocks of grain that they was flying over, and as they flew over, and the grain would fly out, and there was a grain covered an anti-aircraft gun and start firing at it. Well, that's enough of what I can tell you of that raid. It's written up enough, as I say. You can find it in history books and read the whole thing if you were interested. When the 44th came back from Africa that time, we were in need of new ships and men. They had lost, I think, 8, if I remember rightly. I don't remember exactly how many the 44th sent. I think it was a little over 20 that time. So then there was a spell of getting regrouped and some new planes and so on. And we just got in new planes and started flying some missions, which some were good and or easy and some weren't so easy. I was beginning to get used to having buddies get killed and so on, shot up, wounded, one thing and another. When we were sent to Africa again, this time I went, we were sent bombing in support of the 5th, American 5th, the British 8th Army, Salerno Beach. While we were down there, the 44th was sent to Wiener Neustadt to bomb an airplane factory. That day there was 26 of us took off from base to go on that mission. And the Luftwaffe must have been having a reunion. Thank God they hit us with 190s and 109s and everything else. The flak was terrible over target. And they must have been a bunch of green pilots or something. Some of those Heine pilots came in while we were still in the flak zone, fighting us right through their own flak. I presume some of them was hit by their own flak. I don't know. They must have been. Had some holes put in them anyhow. Here again, we were flying without escort. The high brass still hadn't dummied up. There was several squadrons of 38 fighters around where our base were. As far as I know, they weren't doing anything that day. And I don't know why they weren't sent to escort us, but they weren't. Well, there was 26 of us took off that day, and there was 9 of us landed back at the base that night. Our ship had the least holes in it of any of the 9 that got back, and we had 37 holes in flak in it. Some of the gunners had ran out of ammunition entirely. As I said, we had 1,500 rounds per gun. I was not entirely out of ammunition, but I must have been awful close. I had that barrel smoking many times. In fact, I got my first confirmed fighter that day. He came in about 11 o'clock, as I recall now. I started firing at about 1,000 yards, or guesstimated that. My tracer was going just under him. Armor piercer would go carry up better than tracer. We were loaded three armor piercing to the belt, 1 tracer and 1 incendiary. So I knew my tracer was going home. He went to smoking at about 500 or 600 yards, something like that, and headed downhill. I never did see whether they were to shoot him out of his plane or not. There was so darn much going on that Never got a chance to follow him. I knew he was out of the fight. That was a pretty lonesome night that night. You figure out there was 260 men. There was 10 men to a crew. Climbed down the plains that morning, and there was 90 of us. Got off of them that night at the base. It was a pretty sad night that night. They always gave us a fifth of whiskey to the crew when we got back. They should have given us a fifth of whiskey per man that night. Well, there was nothing left, of course, for the 44th to do then. We're down to 9 ships, except for the high brass to send us back to England for regrouping and getting planes and men back. So, of course, we had taken ground personnel with us to work on the planes. They didn't have enough. We had to help work on the planes, taking care of them. The flying personnel had to. The temperature down there in the daytime was anywhere from 110 up. The flies and mosquitoes, you couldn't believe them. It was the worst flying place I was ever in my life. I thought I'd roast from the heat and die from the flies and sand. The wind blew all the while. The sand, dust, everything you ate gritted through your teeth. And we got dysentery. Some said it was from the flies, and some said it was from the dirt, and some said it was from the change of English mild temperature or moderate temperature to that heat. I don't know, but we had diarrhea like you couldn't believe. It's sometimes when we were flying, it was really pathetic. With all those clothes on, in fact, there was some childish things happen down there. Well, our crew, they had to leave some of the crews and men there. They couldn't take them all, and the ground personnel and so on. They had to take the crew chiefs and the high brass. So there was, I forget, 3, 4 crews of us were left there to come by air transport. Well, we were there, must be, for about 2 weeks, near as I remember, before air transport finally got us loaded up and flew us back to England. We flew in a C-54, I remember, bucket seats. And we flew at night, and the only time I ever was airsick, I woke up along in the night sometime or other in that plane. And of course those things, those T-54s, they were great airplanes and so on, but they flapped like a crow and wobbled around, and I woke up and sick. My gosh, sakes alive, I was airsick. And that is the only darn time that I ever was airsick in my life. Well, they landed us, I remember, in Prestwich, Scotland. And then we flew from there to London, the base there. And then they loaded us on a train. This would have been in September. And that miserable, cold, English, stormy weather. And all we had on was summer uniforms. And we'd just come out of 110, 15 degree heat. I thought we'd freeze to death before we got to Shipton. And then when we got to Shipton, we had to load into the back of an army truck and drive to about 7 miles from there to the base. Boy, I was cold when I got to... We all were. That's the Army for you. Well, then we started flying missions. So I say, some were easy, some were hard. We lost some, and sometimes we didn't do too bad, sometimes we did pretty good. I still was flying left waist gun, and on my 7th mission, there was a guy on Lieutenant Townsend's crew. His name was Don Hard. He was the first radio, and he caught one. And, he caught several. It was flak that got him. Bad enough that he was shipped stateside. I never knew how he made out until I read just recently in 44th Logbook, where Don Hart of the 44th 68 Squadron had died. And he was the only Don Hart that I ever knew of in the 68 Squadron, so I mean, he must have made it all right. Well, I took his place as first radio.
3. It's on.
I remember one of the missions, we went to the Ruhr Valley. We used to call that Flak Alley. My gosh, the flak, when we'd come over that, of course, that was the German manufacturing might, was all the Ruhr Valley. You'd come over that valley, the flak was wall to wall. You'd swear that never a plane could go through it. Well, a lot of them didn't, but some of us did. We pulled off that valley one day, and they were hitting us hard. We were getting fighter escort this time too. High brass had finally come to put them fighters up there and get us through. After all, we were carrying the payload. The thing to do was to get us there. We come off fighting hard that day. The flames were zigzagging around. I don't know how to describe it, but sometimes things can get going so fast in an aerial fight that you get kind of lost. Well, anyhow, the formation had went through us, and how it happened, I never knew, nor I never talked to any other men that did either. But for just an instant, I glanced out, and there was a German fighter right in the heart of our formation. Now, you couldn't fire in the heart of the, or at least you shouldn't. You were just liable to hit a bomber. Although there was occasion, not intentionally, I know that there was bombers come back that obviously had 50 caliber holes in it. The Germans carried 303s and 20 millimeters. You could tell the difference in 50. He was there for just an instant, gave us a high sign, laid it up, and let it go downhill, and never a tracer fired him. There was not a tracer. I was looking right straight at him, and there wasn't a single tracer went after him. I didn't fire myself. And I think that would have been about the last mission that I flew as a waist gunner. It must have been. It was just one of those things. He had guts enough to do that, and I guess we just honored him or something. We didn't fire at him. Well, it went on. We flew, I might mention, we flew the January 11th mission, which was a mission that my wife's half-brother was shot down on and never was heard of, must have been killed. And then, by this time, we were getting up, we were flying, counting fighters and all, we were getting up 700, 800 airplanes we'd have in the air. On days you didn't happen to be flying, which happened occasionally, one thing or another, the ship needing repairs or so on, or an overhaul. You didn't fly. You could actually feel them. You could actually feel the air vibrate when they were forming over England, getting the formation formed up. And we knew that sooner or later we were going to go to Berlin. Everybody was guessing as to when it was. Well, we went on the 6th of March in 43. That was the first time that the 8 put 1,000 airplanes, sent in 1,000 airplanes, fighters and bombers all together. How many planes were lost total that day? I don't know. Bombers, they lost 67, I know. I can remember. That's over enemy territory. Now, they would oftentimes be several shot up to the point that they couldn't land when they got back over England. Hydraulic systems shot up and like that. They couldn't get the landing gear down. So they'd bail the crews out over England. The pilot take her to the coast. Just before he got to the coast, put her on automatic, and he'd bail out himself and let them go right on out to sea. There must be an awful lot of bombers out there in the bottom of that ocean. I don't know how many, but it'll be a lot of them. Because I know that happened quite a little. Well, they briefed us that day for Berlin. I can remember at that time, of course, I was flying first radio for Townsend, flying on the flight deck, and what Whenever I handled a gun, I was handling top turret. The engineer or myself handled the top turret. In a B24, they were twin 50s with hydraulic controls, much better gun to fire. In the first place, she was firing two 50 calibers instead of one, and you didn't have to take the buck. The 50, flexible 50, the buck was terrible. You had to brace your hips, elbows against your hips to hold them down. Well, of course, the turret took all of that. With the buffer set for 500-600 rounds per minute, there was quite a lot of buck to them. Well, we went into Berlin, and holy Hannah, that wall of flak was from ground all the way up. Flak, of course, was ground fire, from ground fire. And we got over target. I didn't suppose any of us would get off of target, but we did. Just as we were coming off target, we took a hit in number 2 engine and knocked it out. Townsend had to feather the prop. So we were on 3 engines. And 44, you could not hold formation with 3 engines. You had to have 4. Well, his controls were shot up in him. So he could take her down on the deck. What we called putting it on the deck. That was getting down head chopping, down low. The idea to be get underneath German radar. And also fighters couldn't pass. Like they'd head right out into the ground. We didn't have any fighters. Radio up, I fired flares to call fighters. I fired a green flare, which would call fighters, and we had fighters with us. There was a couple stayed with us till we got out on the deck and headed for the North Sea. We pulled out over that North Sea. We were so low like you could see the white caps. I think I was probably the scaredest that I ever was in my life, because that North Sea at that period of time, in a year, they told us if we hit that drink, we had from 20 minutes to half an hour before hypothermia would take over. And I'm glad I'd rather have been killed by enemy fire than to go into that North Sea. Well, I didn't really, the navigator flew in the nose of the ship. And I didn't really realize, Townsend and I, he had a point. He kept taking her out over the North Sea to get away, be sure to get away from fighters, and so on. And we really wound up, the navigator didn't know where the heck we were. And he didn't want me to break radio silence just yet, so he told me later that he didn't right at that time, so I didn't know we was in trouble. So I turned around, and here was the navigator coming up on the flight deck, and his name was Jones. I said, Jonesy, what the hell are you doing up here? Well, he says, I don't know where we are. Get on that key and get us to QDM. So I started pounding that key, and when the signal came back through, it was very faint, and it was third class. Third class QDM meant they gave us a heading. And about all it meant was, we hear you, we think maybe this is the heading you ought to take. At that time, I really was worried. I guess the rest of the crew did well. The bombardier knew that we were in trouble. The engineer, the guys flying the waist and tail gunner and ball gunner didn't know. They were just well off, they didn't know. And so I gave the navigator that heading. He says, okay, he gave it to the pilot, and we'll take that head and keep pounding that key, Eddie. And you better believe I did. Well, eventually they came through second class. Their third class must have been pretty good, because they got down to second class. Second class meant that we're pretty sure that we know where you are. He changed the head not too much. I don't remember how many degrees, but it's not too much. And finally, it came down to first class QDM, which meant we've got you. This is the head, and take it. There again, I don't think that we changed hardly any. The first, near as I can remember. Well, we finally hit that English coast. My God, if those white cliffs didn't look good that day. And Townsend, of course, had been working the heck out of the three motors. He had to. Flying at that low altitude and hold plenty of speed to keep us airborne. The motors were heating pretty bad. When we come over an RAF base, he turned around and told me to see if I could get clearance. I radioed in and got clearance for us to land. He rolled her down the ways. He didn't monkey around. He didn't even circle the air base. He just, when he got okay, he just headed her down the runway and he set her down. And we stayed there that night at the RAF base. And I remember they were having a dance. We went to the dance. Of course, we had all these darn clothes on. We had to take our shoes and so on off and dance in our stocking feet, but we did. Got along very well, especially after we'd had a few beers. And the next day, the 44th flew a motor and mechanics up to fix our plane and took us back to the base. Where we used a different plane then until. Well, then I remember there was a fellow, Johnny Nozzle, flew right waist on our guy down. He took a fellow by the name of Jim Dick's place. Jim Dick finished his mission, and Johnny Nozzle took his place. And I remember when they coming off of that was off the Ruhr Valley. I think that may have been January the 11th. I'm not sure. And anyhow, we were getting hit pretty darn hard. And intercom on the plane had been pretty busy, talking back and forth and calling off fighters and one thing and another. There come a lull in the fight, and the intercom was quiet as could be. All at once, Johnny's voice came on. He says, "I'm a Polak. What's your guys' excuse for being here?" I always remembered that. He was Polish, but he was a good fellow. He used to kid a lot about being Polish. Well, then they come, by this time, I was up to 22 missions. At that time, period of time, we only had to fly 25 missions, and that was a tour. It later kept going up until the Luftwaffe kept getting weaker. It kept going up until I guess the last guys had to fly 35 missions in order to finish the tour. Well, then we started out on April the 8th to the Ruhr Valley again, Brunswick that time. And we went in. We were the 44th was flying what they call Purple Heart Corner. That meant we were the tail end of the formation. On top of that, Townsend was flying Purple Heart Corner of the 44th formation. So we were Purple Heart Corner, our crew that time. Which was all right. I mean, you had to take your turns flying Purple Heart Corner, which is called that because the first crew's part of the formation over, the ground gunners would get the range, would get our altitude, and by the time the latter part of the formation was coming over, they had that altitude down about perfect. We lost number 3 engine over target. As I mentioned before, you cannot hold formation with a B24 with only 3 engines. So we had to pull off a formation. We hadn't reached the identification point yet. We hadn't dumped our bombs. So we still had the bombs. One of the radio op jobs was to open the bomb bay doors and watch the bombs out. They had to do that to be sure they all went out. They were an automatic release, but they also had a manual release. In case some of the automatic release didn't happen to work, the radio op had to go out on the catwalk which is the center of the bomb bay, and release them manually. I never had to do that. They always, I've heard many radio ops tell have had to go out and release them manually. I never had to. They always went out, and they did this time. We dumped them to get rid of them and turned and headed back. The controls were shot up enough that he didn't dare take it down on the deck. He'd got us to stay at altitude. I fired green flares, and the fighters were right, mostly too darn busy. They couldn't come back to help us. They were too busy protecting the main formation. So we were alone. We weren't entirely alone. There was a lot of bombers headed back. The 44th took a terrible pounding that day. There were several 44th bombers headed back. And I seen, before we went down, I seen one go down with no chutes. He was hit dead center. His bombs must have exploded. Well, the fighters started hitting us. They called from the waist up to the flight deck that Churchill, the ball gunner, was hit. They didn't know how bad. They could get no response from him. Well, the engineer was in the top turret at that time, so I was free. Townsend sent me back to see if there's anything I could do for Churchill. I have to assume that saved my life. I'm the only man alive that was on the flight deck that day. Well, I got back there, and there was nothing that I could do for Churchill. I don't know how he was hit, but Churchill was gone. And I just started calling Townsend to tell him that there was nothing I could do with Churchill, when there must have been a 20 millimeter. The fighters hit both waist gunners were firing like mad, and so was the top turret. They must have a 20 millimeter exploded in the main oxygen banks over the bomb bay, because it was a heck of an explosion. I was knocked down and about half dazed for a minute. I got up, and Bray, the left waist gunner, who was gone. I didn't know where he'd gone. I later, of course, on the ground, he had been firing at a fighter. The fighter went under. He'd leaned out towards the window. An explosion had heaved him out. He said he figured we was probably at about 20,000 feet at that time. He said he just come to out in the air. He pulled his ripcord, and he said he figured he must have been at about 10,000 feet when his chute opened. Well, I ran over and took his gun, his flexible gun. I was going to pull Churchill out of the turret and get in the ball turret. But the waist gun was right there empty, so I went over and grabbed that. Just as I did, there was two fighters queuing up out there at about 1,200 yards. They peeled off and headed in. I started firing, and I don't know, at somewhere around 300-400 yards, there was a 190 coming in. They were a blister canopy. Something flew off of the top of that plane. It must have been the canopy. I don't know. He went underneath the plane. I could see it when he went underneath. He wasn't going to fly any more fighters. But they put the finishing touches on it. So they may have been some come in over the top. We never knew. Because, of course, Clemens was in the top turret, and Clemens didn't make it. Number 1 was a fire. Number 3 was already shot out. The plane was headed downhill. The order came through. There's difference of opinion on this. In my opinion, it was the co-pilot that gave the order. One of the reasons for that is the way he gave it. He said, "That's all she wrote, hit silk, and God help you." And that just didn't sound like what Townsend would say. Of course, Townsend was in command of the ship. Townsend was the man that should give the orders. The co-pilot, second. Well, some of them thought it was Townsend. I don't know. Well, I rolled out the window and hit silk. And as I was floating down, I could see 4 other chutes. That's all I could see. Well, as it turned out, that's all there was. counting those four in mine. As I got down towards the ground, as well as still up in the air, it seemed as if I was going awful slow. As I got down towards the ground, I seemed as if it was coming up awful fast. They had briefed us that it was about the equivalent of jumping off a 10-foot roof. I guess it was. I could see people coming out from the little village there. A little village looked about like Lynn. I can remember thinking if I ever get back to Lynn, I'm never going to leave. And they kept running out towards where I was, and I was coming down into a woods. I could see that. As I went down into the woods, I remember thinking of my eyes. Of course, I didn't wear glasses that time, and I threw my arm up over my eyes. My helmet and goggles had been torn off when I pulled the... apparently I didn't have the balance strap tightened under my chin. I don't know, but when I pulled the ripcord, my helmet went off anyhow. Well, I came down through the woods, landed right on a little brush pile. How lucky can you get? It was quite a little jolt. I got out of my parachute harness, and I forgot to mention, they had told us to tie a pair of GI shoes onto our harness, which I did. A lot of guys didn't. A lot of guys who were prisoners regretted that. I got my police line boots and electric shoes off and so on, and got my GI shoes on, and got rid of my harness, and ran out through the woods. And I knew those people were coming to the edge of the woods. And I saw another brush heap there, and I crawled under that. And I laid there. Pretty soon I could see them. There must have been 15 of them anyhow, and some of them had guns. And they were circling all around looking there, and I kept watching them. All at once I seen one guy point his rifle right towards me, start walking right straight towards me. And I thought, well, this is it. He sees me. He's going to do one or two things. He's going to shoot me or he isn't. There's nothing else left to do, so I stood up, held my hands up in the air. Oh, he didn't shoot, I'm glad. He came over to me, and I started jabbering away in German. The only thing I could understand is they kept saying Americano Tigerflieger, Chicago. Hitler had spread a lot of propaganda that the American Air Force were all gangsters from Chicago. That's why we like those bombing their cities and so on and so forth. Well, apparently his propaganda worked. At that particular time, the only thing I knew about Chicago, I'd ridden through it twice on a troop train. And they kept saying Chicago, American Terrorflieger. Well, I was American Terrorflieger, I guess. At least I was American Flieger. Flieger meant flyer in German. I didn't know that, but I figured it out what they did. They took me over to this little crossroads, and there was a fire station there. It had a little old fire engine in it, horse-drawn. They locked me in there, and they took my cigarettes away from me, my lighter. Everybody was smoking American cigarettes. I wasn't smoking nothing. I really wanted one. And they put me there and shut the doors and went out. I know how an animal in the zoo feels. Now, every few minutes, a different guy would come in, wander over and stare at me, you know, I suppose, looking at the American Chicago gangster, he thought. I kept pointing to my cigarettes and went on the thin a cigarette and most of the day. Finally, one guy gave me some tobacco and a paper. I rolled a cigarette. God, that cigarette tasted good. Well, I was there. This was probably about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was there till, 6, 7 o'clock, and there was a batch of them come in, and there was a guy eating, 2 or 3 of them were eating sandwich. They were a new batch looking at me. And I pointed the sandwich in my mouth. I'll be darned if one of them didn't get back out. And he came in with a piece of black bread. There was some butter on it. He gave it to me, or I guess probably it was oil. And I took a bite of that, and when I got it up in my mouth, the smell of it near knocked me over. And I took a bite of it, the taste was worse. I later learned to like it. But I thought, boy, I better eat this. He brought it in and so on. I just thought I better eat it. So I ate it. I was hungry. That made something to eat. It sure didn't taste very good. It didn't smell very good. And along about 8 or 9 o'clock that night, the Army arrived, or it was the Air Force left office, with a truck. And I went out. They led me out to get out of the truck. And there was 3 guys of my crew, Wormy, John Nozzle, and Bray. That left, I learned from Wormy, he was the bombardier, he and the navigator flew in the nose of the ship, but Jonesy got out. But Jonesy wasn't with him, and there was other guys from different planes of our crew. I later learned that we counted up of guys from 11 different crews from the 44th that went down right around target there. Now, strangely enough, there was 44 planes from the 44th bomb group that went that day, and 1/4 of them went down right around target. And I didn't know until just about a year ago that there was 2 others that got back to base. The one, although he had some wounded aboard, none of them that bad. They bailed out over England, as I have mentioned before, let the ship go out to sea. And the other one, his co-pilot was dead, and he bailed out the rest of the men, and he slid it in alone in order to bring his co-pilot's body back. That man, I didn't know him. He was from the 67th Squadron. He was quite a man. So that meant 13 ships of the 44 were lost that day. The second largest loss that the 44th ever took in its career. The first loss was on the Winter Neustadt raid, where we lost 17 out of 26.
Well, I'm trying to avoid showing the kitchen because I'll probably be moving around. But unlike your house, there's not really a spot I can stick it. I guess that's about right. Now I have to crawl underneath to get out of here without being seen.
Well, that won't do any harm, would it? Just walking across.
Yeah. And, well, don't forget to tell about the bathtub or whatever it was where they used to be able to go and wash at the what am I walking on? At the camp. Date and time. Please set clock. I just set the clock. Okay.
Start?
Yeah, I would say go ahead. Yeah.
I started, of course, got on the truck to say hello to the guys, and the heinies started hollering next expression, which I didn't know what it meant at that time. So all I figured out that no talking. I don't know why we couldn't talk, but we could. Well, they took us to a RAF air base, Luftwaffe air base, and shut us in a room. And this was probably along 11, 12 o'clock at night. There was a table in that room. It was not a very large room. I don't remember exactly how many of us were in that room. But I do remember that John Nozzle and I laid down on the table. That way everybody could get laid down on the floor. The floor was solid men, and the table was solid men, with Johnny and I laying on it. If it hadn't been for the table, we'd have been too many to lay down the floor. It was probably around 7 o'clock, something like that, near as I remember. They rousted us out and took us out to a, well, it was a mess hall. They gave us a little thin soup, and each of us got a slice of bread. And at that time, I discovered there was a lot of GIs. There was a lot of planes went down on that raid. I think it was over 70 the final count that went down. There was a lot of Yankees there. Well, they loaded us up on trucks then and took us to a train station and loaded us on boxcars. And they put us wall to wall practically in the boxcars. It was not cold. The weather was quite warm for that time of year, that early in April. This would have been, let's see, about the 10th of April. And they left the doors open. Two guards sat there in the door with submachine guns. They put a bucket in the boxcar for us to relieve ourselves in. Now, there were other boxcars. I don't just remember how many boxcars there was as prisoners. And we started. Of course, being non-priority rail, we were pushed off onto side tracks every time a regular train had to go through. Every time we'd go through a town and the door opened, why the civilians would be hollering parafliggers, Americano canisters, and so on. The guards would be waving. I remember one guard kept shoving his hand up and down when he waved. We finally figured out that he must be goosing a ghost. We didn't bother to tell him that we figured that out, but that's what we figured he was doing. And we were crowded to the point in that boxcar that we could not lay down. In fact, sitting position was about the best we could do. For the most part, during the day, some of us stood up leaning against the sides, and the rest sat around. We passed the relief bucket around, and every once in a while the guards would empty it for us, which was decent of them, I guess. That night, guards left the door. They were somewhere on the train, I suppose. They shut the doors and locked them. And, well, I forgot, that evening, long towards evening, we were stopped in out of sight rail. And they gave us a piece of bread and brought out a bucket of water with a dipper in. We each get a drink of water. And they had to fill the bucket several times. And then that night, there was nobody, the guards were on the train, but the doors was locked. There was nothing we could do. It got quite stifling in there, I remember. And the odor of the slot jar got quite prominent. And the next day, they fed us a little that morning. I think, if I remember rightly, it was just a chunk of bread, that black bread, which was beginning to taste better to me. Didn't even smell quite so bad. We all conceded that. And then the guard left the door open, emptied up the slop jar, and yeah, I think we got some water. They watered it. And late that afternoon, we got the WWII. That's at Frankfurt on the Main. That was an interrogation center where they interrogated prisoners of war. We were unloaded there. There was quite a collection of Air Force prisoners there when we arrived. Guys that had been gathered up from other raids, went down and so on. And we were unloaded there in the WWII and well, I guess you'd say a fence. There was an area there, 2-3 acres, fenced off. We were in that. In the daytime, fortunately it wasn't storming, they kept us in that mostly. At night, we were run into like there was 2 or 3 of them. It was like a big hangar. They had what they called pallets laying around on the floor, which is nothing more or less than a ramsack, probably 6-7 feet long. with a little straw in it, a little straw. I never counted them, but I always figured there's probably somewhere from 13 to 15 straws in each one of them. That's where we slept. And then by the Geneva Convention, all a prisoner of war has to give is his name, rank, and serial number. That's all. Well, they'd take us each one at a time, take us in. What outfit was he from? How many planes did he have in their outfit, and so on. Go on a whole bunch of blowing, which I didn't really see made much difference anyhow. And I kept saying name, rank, and serial number. I kept giving them that. And I should mention that in the Army I was known as Avy, a nickname. Very foolishly, I had that written on my flight jacket. And this interrogation officer, he had a face like a bulldog. I always remember that. He looked like a bulldog. Looked at that, Avy, Jew, Avy, Jew. No, not Jew. No, not Jew. Well, I don't think he ever did believe me. And he had a pair of light leather gloves. He had them in his hand. I was sitting in a chair, and he walked up to me, and he said, Avy, Jew, and he slapped me across the face with those gloves. Well, that's the one and only time that I ever was hit by a German guard or anything. I don't know just why. I suppose it startled me, young and so on, and I stood up. And he wore a pistol, all the officers wore a pistol. He put his hand on his pistol, and he says, what are you going to do, Sergeant? You've heard the story that a 45 equalizes all men. They'll never believe it. When the other guy's wearing one and you're not his equal, I sat back then. Well, he never got anything out of me except my name, rank, and serial number, and I don't think he did any of the rest of them either. And I think we were there at WWII probably 3 or 4 days. I don't remember exactly. They loaded us back on boxcars again, same old deal, same deal as it was when we was going to WWII, same accommodations, and just as crowded. I know that we left that day, we were that night on that train, the next day and the next night, and it must have been in the forenoon that we got to Krems, Austria. Krems is about 20 miles from Vienna. It's in a valley. They unloaded us. They were somewhere around 350 to 400 of us altogether, and marched us up the hill. And up on top of this hill was a prison known as Stalag 17B. I took a look at that and I thought, great God, if I live through this, it'll be a miracle. There was a bunch of barbed wire fence, probably 18 feet high, with guard towers here, every little cut stitch. And then inside of that outside fence was another fence, probably about 8 feet farther in, and the center of that was filled with barbed wire. And there was barracks, low, one-story barracks, lined up wall to wall. And we were led into that, the American compound. The American compound was run by the Air Force, it was Luftwaffe Air Force, held approximately 45 prisoners by the time it got all done. I don't know just how many we made at the time. There didn't too many come in after us. We must have filled it to about 4,000. They probably was 500 or 600 come in after we were brought in there. And that loaded the it loaded the American compound. The Russian compound held approximately 15,000. That was far larger than us. We were separate from the Russian. There was fence between us and the Russian compound. We were led down to the barracks. By this time, we were hungry. I mean, I don't remember on the train there, they fed us 2 or 3 times Once we got a little thin soup, I remember, and I had a few cups. We had to keep passing the cups around. They mostly just a chunk of black bread. And they wired us a little bit. We were taken into the barracks. They were long, low barracks with wall-to-wall bunks on each side, down through the center, an alleyway probably 5 feet wide. And the tiers of bunks, they were a double tier of bunks, and it amounted to, well, it actually amounted to 4 wide and 2 long. Now that meant there was 8 men on the bottom tier and 8 men on the top, and there was about a 3-foot space between these bunks. There was 132 of us in this barracks, which in an American barracks back here, I would have said there would have been between not over 65 men, and there was 132 of us in there. And today they cry about the American prisoners who were in our prisons being crowded. They don't know what crowded is. There was an exercising area there that encompassed, well, in our compound, it probably encompassed, about a half an acre. There was 3 compounds, which, as I say, would be divided up between, when we finally got full 4,500 men. And each one had an exercising area about the same size, about a half an acre. There was a warning wire about 10 feet from the main wire. That was just a single strand around. If you stepped over that wire, the guard had a right to shoot you. I never knew of anyone stepping over that wire. Now, the Red Cross did get us a ball or two and bats. We used to play ball a little bit. And, of course, the ball was forever going over the warning wire. We had to stand and wave at the guards and wait until they gave us permission to step over the warning wire and get the ball. Sometimes they'd give you permission right away, and sometimes with some Hitlerite on guard, you would have to wait a while. He'd just stand there and, I don't know, just piney, I guess, make you wait, and then he'd give you permission to get the ball. And here again, we had one of these pallias of bunks for a piece of plywood laid on some slats. We were given one of these pallias and 1 GI blanket. Well, it wasn't GI, it was German. Army blanket apiece. We were given a cup and a spoon. And that was it, as far as utensils were concerned. In the morning, we were brought hot water. I don't know what for. I guess to have a drink of hot water. At noon, we generally got a little rutabaga soup. They'd bring it in a tub, and they didn't bring it in. We had to form details, go to the mess hall, which was run by the Americans. Of course, it was under guard. There was Americans done the cooking. The cooks didn't come out too bad as far as eating is concerned. And dipped out in the tub and brought to the barracks, the detail out of that barracks. And they had a dipper with it, and we'd line up with our metal cup and get a soup. And that was our noon. And then mornings we got hot water in our bread ration in the mornings. Yeah, we got bread ration in the morning, a little chunk. Now it's probably about 4 slices, probably average slice of bread as we have it today. This was black bread, which was beginning to taste better all the while. And at night, sometimes, probably averaging twice a week, we'd get boiled potatoes. They'd be boiled potatoes. And once in a while, a little piece of beef. Now, that probably was 2 to 3 times a week. It was quite liable to be blood sausage. which, as far as I can see, was made mostly out of everything that they didn't use, out of a hog or a cow, including the hair and the bristles. But it was famous for meat in it and blood, and so we ate it. And most of the time it would be boiled rutabaga. That was a great place for growing rutabagas over there. I swore I'd never eat another turnip. I didn't for a good many years, but I finally did afterward. And then they were Red Cross parsons, called Red Cross parsons. Now actually what the deal was, the American government paid for them and the Red Cross provided the transportation and the well, not transportation, but the where to Whittle to get them to it. They consisted, in our case, we'd get like a can of Spam with a small can of instant coffee, a small can, sometimes of butter, more reliable oil margarine, a pack of, they were like graham crackers, they were supposed to be more concentrated or something, they said, I don't know. And a D-bar, concentrated chocolate, a few packs of cigarettes. That was before the curse was the cigarettes. They probably much better as food. But anyhow, we got cigarettes and a can of powdered milk. That was the basics of what was in it. Sometimes they'd get a can of liverwurst. It varied a little. But that was basically what was in one of those parcels. And if they were coming through all right, each man got one a week. Well, with that and what the Germans gave us, incidentally, these things that I mentioned were not exactly in large quantities. We got along pretty good. We weren't overeating, but we got along pretty good. But then they'd be spells that they didn't come through. Sometimes we'd be cut down to a half a parcel a week, sometimes a parcel between 4 men. Those spells, we got hungry. I mean, we got hungry. And we used to, it sounds crazy, but the Red Cross used to get us some books. To get through the Red Cross, we'd get a few books, not a lot. Some playing cards, and I mentioned the ball, the bat, a few things like that to play with. We used to cut up the cardboard boxes the parcels come into in chunks and make them into chips and various denominations, take the cards and play poker for food. Well, I was quite a half playing poker at that time. I played quite a lot. Sometimes I ate pretty high and sometimes I didn't. But anyhow, it made something to do. We used to laugh about where else can you sit and play poker all day, nothing else to do. Twice a day they called us out for roll call. We had to go out and stand and take roll call, the count of us, to see if we were all there and so on and so forth. And every once in a while I'd have a barracks inspection. I generally done that on rainy days. And we'd have to go out and stand in formation while the Heinies, high brass of the Heinies, wandered around the barracks looking for crystal radio sets and one thing and another, or knives or guns or something, I guess. I don't know where they thought we'd get things. We used to do some trading with the Russians. The Russians, they worked. Of course, the Russians did not belong to the Geneva Convention, although those guys in the Russian compound were supposed to have been officers. They were supposed to have been Air Force men. I don't think that the looks of them, they all were. Some of them were kids and some were old men. Anywhere in between. We'd throw cigarettes, packs of cigarettes, over the fence to the Russians. They would be taken out and working on farms, and they would trade the cigarettes with the Germans. American cigarettes were in big demand overseas. For onions, potatoes, carrots, something like that. Then they'd bring them back and throw them over the fence to us. So we got some vegetables that way. Not a lot, but we got some. And so I never had any luck trading with the guards. Some guys had some luck trading cigarettes with guards for food. I never succeeded myself in that score. I had to depend on getting lucky at poker, I guess, to get anything extra. I was fortunate. At that time, I did not drink coffee, although the way I drink it now, you wouldn't think that, but I didn't then. And coffee, the cans of instant coffee were in big demand. I could trade them with guys for food, which I was more interested in. But a lot of the guys wanted their coffee in the mornings. I say the Heidi's brought us some hot water, and if you drank coffee and you had some instant coffee, okay, you could have. Guys like me, I didn't want to drink a hot water. I took my bread. And, well, yes, I used to take the water sometimes and mix up some of that powdered milk. But more often I used cold water. The cold water was not on all the while in the barracks. It was on when we was first there. It was on most of the time in the daytime. It shut off at noon. All it was at one end of the barracks was a water pipe came in there. And that was where just one pipe came in, and there was a big tub set underneath it. And about one day a week, they would give us coal enough to put in the soft coal was, to start a fire under that and heat water. We could wash ourselves in hot water and wash our clothes in that tub. So you can imagine about how clean we kept. We done our best. We done as good as we could. And later on, I never really knew why. The water was cut down to about 2 hours a day as all the water was on. Sometimes you used to get pretty dash thirsty. In the middle of the barracks, there was an cast iron stove, and they used coal in. That was the heat. And now sometimes these potatoes we got were raw. I don't know why. I guess they didn't give the cooks enough fuel. We got the potatoes raw. That was flat. The top of that stove was flat. We used to take cut those potatoes up and take some of that oil and down there and fry the potatoes. Again, they didn't get them very done, but we got them warmed up. They was more edible. And that was also the heat that there was in the barracks. During the winter time, the bunks were actually, they was boards between them, so each man was separate like. Well, in order to keep warm, we used to take tear that center board out of there, and 3 of us sleep in the same bunk. That gave us 3 blankets, although we had to be pretty close together for blankets to reach, covered all 3 of us. We took turns sleeping in the center. I was always looking forward to the night I slept in the center, being a cold-blooded cut. But that way we managed to keep warm. There was a guy by the name of Bob Barker slept with John Nozzle and I slept side by side. He slept with us for our 3rd man. And I never heard from him from the time we got back. Never knew what happened to him. And about a year ago, I got a telephone call from him in California. Called all the way until I got a spray. I remember one of the things he asked me if I still played poker, and I told him no, I didn't play anymore. He always remembered, he said I was all the time playing poker with some of the guys.
Who was that called? Who was that called?
Bob Barker. He was a heck of a good guy. He landed in the Army right off his graduation platform. But we got the news. We had crystal sets. The guys would trade stuff with guards and get the material and make crystal sets and get the news. And then every night, one guy, he'd go around the barracks and tell what the news was. I got one along in the middle of my career there. I got pretty lucky, and I traded a bunch of cigarettes with a guy who was short for his crystal set. I took some of the boxes, the Red Cross house come in, and I made a miniature barn and a silo, and I put the crystal set in the silo, and I had that for a while, so I listened to the news myself. We listened at night after the lights went out at 8 o'clock. And,
You had a what? A miniature barn and a silo?
yeah, and then, I don't know, somehow, I guess they got wise or something. They pulled an inspection on our barracks one day, and when I went in, my crystal set gone. They shut it off. That's true. Okay.
Yep. She's on.
I'll have to back up here a minute. It's been so many years I forgot some of the things. At WWII, we were stripped. And of course all of our electric equipment that we were wearing was taken from us because that was turned over to the German Air Force. They used that equipment too. Plus most of the guys who were wearing fleece-lined equipment, that was taken from them. I was not wearing fleece-lined equipment because of my being on the flight deck. I didn't need that fleece-lined equipment. So actually, I came out pretty good. All I took from me was my electric suit, which I didn't particularly need anyhow. There's no place to plug it in. And they took watches. Now, it may sound strange to you folks, modern folks or something. Wristwatches are the thing. Back at that time, people didn't wear wristwatches too much. I doubt if half of the men were wearing a wristwatch. I was. And they were taken then. At that period of time, I had a heavy head of hair. So I got a brainstorm, and when I see they were taking watches, I took my watch off and put it on top of my head and made like I was scratching my head and wadded my hair around in it, and they missed it. So I got my watch through with me, and I had it all through prison. That should have went in during the time I was at WWII, but I guess I forgot it. Well, to go back to the prison again, and of course, there was always more or less attempts to escape. First off, this happened before I was at Stalag 17B. There was one guy escaped from 17B and made it all the way back to England. Now, they said that he spoke 3 or 4 languages fluently. He was a very well-educated guy. They said he spoke two were German and French. They said he spoke them fluently. He made it all the way back. I have later understood that he made it to France and got into the French underground, and that way got back to England. The way that he got out of the prison, they were marching a bunch of Russian prisoners. They marched them into our American compound to clean the latrines. The Americans did not work. The Germans lived up to the Geneva Convention in that respect. We were all non-commissioned officers there in the prison. They didn't work. And when they marched out, he had changed places with one of the Russian prisoners. The Russian prisoner was Sergei. I've seen him many times. He was there not in our particular section of the prison. He was in a different compound. But I've seen him many times. And he spoke English. Now, this sounds like a big story, but this actually happened. And that fella made it back to England. So this was tried again. Now, this happened during the period of time that I was there. In a bunch of Russians working there. There was an American GI. Man, he also spoke German, so I understood. I didn't know the fellow, but I understood he spoke German fluently. He changed with a prisoner, a Russian prisoner, and went out with the Russians and then escaped from a work detail, the same as the other fellow did. But he was caught and brought back. Now, this is going to sound like it's impossible, but it happened. At the barracks where he was, they had managed to dig out some roof boards overhead of the roof, the barracks. And at roll call, that Russian had a hell of a life. I'm telling you, he had to be right there at the barracks all the while. He managed to sneak in that and hide during the roll call, so that the roll call always came out right. The Germans didn't know it, so this was, a good last 6 months that we was in the prison. There was one more prisoner in the American section of the prison than they had on their record. They didn't know it. They never caught him. He spoke fluent English, that fellow. And then one time another method of trying to get out was trying to dig a tunnel. You know, I got in on one of them. We got caught. We didn't get very far. We were digging a tunnel. The dirt there you could dig the stuff with a tin can. It was not rocky at all. To try to dig under the fence and get out, nobody ever succeeded in those attempts. We were put in solitary confinement for a little while. I was in for a few days. Another method was to dig in under the Russian compound, and like I mentioned, change places with the Russian prisoners so you could go out on work detail. It's been easier to escape from a Russian detail. But nobody, those were the only two men that ever actually got outside of the prison that I know of. I'm sure I know of all of them. They allowed us 4 letters a week, or a month. We were allowed they had a special piece of paper they gave us. It was very small, and we could write 4 letters a month and send them out. Now, of course, when I got there, they was prisoners been there for a year or two. They were already getting mail, man. It seemed like a long time before I got any mail. I don't remember how long it was, but at least 3 months before I heard anything. And then I began to get some letters from home. From what they tell me, I never got all of them, but I did get quite a few. Mail call would come about twice a month. They'd have mail call. They just, of course, mail come in often than that, but they just piled it up, and about twice a month they would call us to send the detail up to the main office, and we would get the mail, and they'd bring it down and call off our names. That was a highlight of the prison when we got mail. One time, there was a tunnel actually in the process. I guess they did finally find it. I don't remember. They brought in dogs. They had these dogs, supposed to be bloodhounds. I don't know whether they were or not, but I don't know why they kept them around there. As I say, nobody got out of prison that much. But anyhow, they brought the dogs in. They were supposed to find, I guess, where the tunnel was or something. And we used to sometimes in the Red Cross parcels, we'd get small cans of salmon. Some of the guys, I don't know how they did it. They ground up some glass somehow or other and mixed it up with salmon. One of the dogs was running around there, and they fed it to him. I would never have bothered to have done that. I got salmon. I ate it. I liked it. They said the dog died. I don't know, probably did. But there was lots of things that we done for amusement. So when there was a little snow on, we used to go out in the exercising lot and make a fox and geese ring and take turns going out. There were so many of us, we had to take turns playing fox and geese. We did get a few books through the Red Cross. Generally, they weren't all the greatest of books, but we did have a little reading. We used to form some classes, try to, for the heck of it, learn the German language so we could understand a little bit better. And turn it off a minute, Chester. I was there quite a little while. There was a fellow named Herb Brosman came over to see me. He said somehow or other he heard there was a guy from the shopping, and he was in a different barracks. He'd been there for over a year when I got there. He was from Transu over here, so I got to know him. It was kind of nice to meet somebody from close to home. I might mention at this time that after we all got together and everything, we'd been able to piece out how many of us was left out of the men that went down on the 44th and 11 planes that we knew went down over Germany that day. The one plane, there was none. I guess I spoke about it earlier or the other tape, and I seen it blow off. There was nobody got out of that one. There was 57 men. Now that means there was 110 men in 11 planes, and 57 of us made it. So we beat the average a little. The average was about 50% roughly, planes shot down and men that made it alive. So we did beat the average a little. The friend I mentioned before, James Mickey, of his crew, there was only 3 that made it. Mickey was killed. After I was put on when the first radio up on Townsend's crew, he and I, when we were getting dressed, our lockers were close together. We were always kidding one another. If you don't make it back, I'll name the first boy after you. Well, my youngest daughter's middle name is James Anna. We had one chaplain. Well, yes, he was Catholic chaplain. The Germans, give him credit there. Of course, he was not aerial combat. He was taken in Africa. He was in the chaplain in the infantry. He was brought into the prison. He was the only chaplain there. And he done very well. There was some guys, he held, of course, Catholic. And he held Protestant services. Now, he preached at some of them, but he had fellows who were working along the line of, I guess, being preachers and like that, and they were, so we could have services and burial. There was a few guys died of natural death, and there was a few guys, the hospital was separate from the prison itself. There was a prison hospital there, and they did take guys to that, guys that were shot up. There were guys that were wounded to the point that some of them died in the hospital after they were there or were buried there. I often wondered whether any of those burials, because the burial ground was right outside of the prison, if any of those bodies were ever brought home. I don't know. There was a few guys, well, I guess you'd call it stir crazy. They affected their mind a little bit. Now, not very many. I can only think of 2 or 3 cases that I recall anyhow. They got, well, kind of off in the head a little bit. As a year went on, of course, the air warfare, the Americans were getting more and more control of the air. And occasionally there would be bombing raids around close enough by we could hear the explosions. In fact, they bombed the railroad yard there in Krems once. And of course there was fighters flying escort to kind of brass had got it through their head finally that you wanted to send fighter escort with bombers. And every once in a while, one of those fighters would come down and buzz the prison. They knew the prison was there. That used to be quite a thrill, just to see free Americans flying over it. He'd waggle his wings, and the guards would fire at him with their pistols, and they didn't have any aircraft there, or their rifles. I often wonder if some darn guards get lucky, but they never did, fortunately. They always went on. And then, of course, as war progressed, a lot of the guards were sensible sort of guys. They knew it was only a matter of time. There was a few, of course, regular Hitlerites. They were sure that Germany was going to pull some kind of a magic wand or something and win the war. They were pretty darn miserable to us. There was one or two I swore if I ever saw them in civilian life, I'd kill them. Well, I probably wouldn't have, but at that time I thought I would. Well then, about a month, yes, just about a month, they gave us where the Russians, of course, were getting closer all the while. The Russians were obviously going to come through that. They told us that we were going to be marched out of prison ahead of the Russians. Right. Now, why in the world they wanted to do that, I don't know. Because the Russians were coming one way and the Americans were coming the other, and we were in the middle, and all we were going to do was be walking towards the Americans. But they told us that's what we were going to do, and they did. And we marched out of prison on the 8th of April, carrying our one blanket and what little ever we had, Red Cross parcel left to eat, tied up in that. This was on the 8th of April. It was about the kind of weather that the 8th of April is around here. It wasn't too bad. It stormed quite a lot. There was about 4,000 Americans. They marched us in groups of 500. As I say, there was about 4,500 Americans in the prison, but there was about 500 due to sickness and wounds and like that, unable to march. So there's only about 4,000 of us walking. And the Russians marched behind us. I wouldn't know how many of the Russians. They probably were somewhere in the vicinity of 14,000 Russians marching behind us. And we walked. Well, before I get to that, we were now, that first day, they marched as we came down this hill to a bridge crossing the Danube. A beautiful blue Danube. It looked as muddy as the Mississippi. And at the time we got there, there was an army convoy going across this bridge. So our particular group of 500 was right there by the bridge. They had us pull off the road down by the river while this convoy went by. And somebody got, I'm going to relieve myself in their beautiful blue Danube. Well, that started something. I don't know if it was the whole 500, but as darn close to it was lined up there relieving themselves in the beautiful blue Danube. I'd have liked to have had a picture of that. Well, we finally got across the river, and we'd march and until they got dark, and then sometimes they would let us, the villages, of course, around there, the Bavaria foothills of the Bavarian Alps, they was villages like, and barns and so on, they would let us sleep in barns if it was storming. But not always. If not, why, we just pulled us out in the field, and we generally would manage to get a hold of a little wood some one way or another and build a fire, and there we'd be. They had teams of horses. There were no trucks traveling with us. There were some wagons and horses carried along a few supplies. Actually, on that march, about all we got was a little rutabaga soup and some black bread. Now, twice on the march, they brought up, they did bring some trucks, brought some Red Cross parcels to us. As I remember, I think about one parcel to 4. We got that twice. We really would have got hungry if it hadn't have been stealing on that march. No, we got hungry anyhow. But the guards were about as bad off as we were. They didn't have a whole lot to eat, and they had to live the same as we did. They there with us. And they'd go to sleep at night, and we'd sneak around these barns, and the chickens were kept kind of like chickens were kept 50, 60 years ago in this part of the country. They just roamed. There was chickens in the barns. We stole chickens, we stole eggs, we stole any cotton picking thing we could find. We were 4,000 traveling American thieves. And for the most part, we got away with it. There was a little trouble. Nobody was ever manhandled, but there was a little trouble a few times over this. Somebody was caught stealing something. We banded what we call combines, 5 or 6 men. And anything that a man could steal, we'd divide that night between the 5 or 6. Now, there was quite a lot of dairy cows through there. We generally tried to get somebody to milk a cow on a combine. In our particular combine, I was the farmer. I milked cows all the way across Austria, generally around midnight. Sneak into a barn somewhere and milk the cows into a cup. We still had our cups and drink milk. So I made out better than a lot of them did. Of course, I divided the milk. The guys would have to come in and drink, but I was doing the milk and I done quite a lot of drinking. I often think of that, Mark, but I got along pretty well. We all got along pretty good, except we were darn hungry and part of the time cold and wet. What we, for the most part, to it today would kill me. We kept marching. We got to Bernau, Austria, which as near as I can remember must have been about probably, the 28th, 27th, 28th of April. And at times we could hear enemy fire, or guns, from both fronts, where the sports go on. So it was really crazy, but by this time we were closer to the Americans than we were the Russians. They pulled us out into a woods, and there we camped. And we camped there until the 3rd of May. And at that period, while we was there, it was raining all the while, not hard. It was just rainy, miserable, darn weather. It was an evergreen woods, and we tried to pick up poles and so on, lean-tos, and put evergreen over it and kept a fire going. The fires were pretty smoky, sizzly, everything was wet. That was a miserable time. My gosh, it was pathetic. We were soaking wet, and the 3rd of May, in the forenoon, Patton's 3rd Army boys come down the road. Man, I never forgot that sight. They was weapons carriers, troop carriers, tanks, jeeps, and the GIs hanging all over them, and they weren't messing around. They were all carrying BRs and rifles and so on, and when they knew that we were there, they bailed off, and boy, they started shouting deny. The guards didn't give them any trouble. They sure didn't want them, because a lot of them boys had been coming since D-Day, and they weren't fooling around. They didn't know when GI, or German GI, he wanted to be damn careful what he done with his hands. He wanted to keep them showing. I seen grown men cry that day, and I wasn't too far from it myself. Well, they set us up with a field kitchen and got us a little something to eat. There wasn't a whole lot. Them guys were advanced, of course, advanced units. The main body of the Army wasn't up yet. And they gave us some guns, told us to take anything we want. A bunch of us went down the road and remember to come to a gas fountain. That's a rodeo. And it was a collection point for eggs for the Army. There was a whole bunch of eggs traded up there and sent for the German Army. Man alive, I mean, we ate eggs. Believe it or not, in not too much over a day, I ate 3 dozen eggs, one way and another. I wonder I wasn't sick. There was also a barrel of brandy in there. Well, that sure helped. I got GIs were springing all over the country, collecting up whatever they could. And of course, prisoners were coming in right and left, German prisoners. The infantry was bringing them in. It was a mess. The thing was over, the Germans were giving up. And I always liked a hat, their German hats. I took one of their hats. I didn't finally wind up with that. I wound up with the accoutrements off of it, but I gave him a skull cap that I'd been wearing. That kept his head covered. I remember Pete McCall had an old pair of shoes on that was wore out. He liked their leather boots. I remember one officer, he made him take his leather boots off, and they fitted Pete. Pete took them and gave the officer his shoes. I don't think the officer was too darn happy. And actually, we were there, I guess, about a week. Of course, the war ended on the 7th. And I've often thought about it. We survived the war. It was a wonder we survived the ending of it. Needless to say, I never saw any GIs abuse any Germans or anything else. They drank their booze and ate food. It was quite a hilarious time around there. Okay, I just better shut up.
Well, that was precipitate. Okay, I'm coming.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
I forgot a few things that I should mention here before I get too far. Back when we were in the prison there, Americans, they didn't treat Americans very bad. No, they didn't. The Russians, God, we used to have a saying that if a guard wanted to see if his gun was loaded, he pointed at a Russian and pulled the trigger. Well, that's exaggerating a little, but not a whole lot. There was quite a lot of Russians that were shot there in the prison for not a whole heck of a lot that I ever could see. And a couple of things I forgot when we was on the march. I remember one time we pulled us into a field, and there was planting potatoes. The fellow just been planting potatoes there. He was just finishing up. It was a fairly good-sized patch of potatoes that he planted there. The next morning, I don't think there was a potato in the ground there. During the night, we went out and dug those potatoes up and brushed them off a little bit and ate them. By golly, they tasted good, too. They're a little gritty, but... And, I never was in a concentration camp. I never saw the inside of one. But we marched past, I don't remember just where it was. We marched past a bunch of Jews that they had out working on the road. My golly, that was the most pathetic thing I ever seen. I didn't think we was in very good shape. They weren't hardly human. Those people were in terrible shape. They were trying to beg for us for something to eat. And I always remember it just wasn't too far beyond that. After we went by them, we went through a little village. I didn't get any of it. I was marching kind of the middle of the column. There was a young woman out there with a loaf of black bread, breaking off chunks and handing it as they went by. Some of the guys got a piece of bread. I didn't, but I always remembered that woman. And another thing I forgot, we killed a horse and butchered it right after we were liberated there and ate it. And you know, it wasn't bad eating at all. It was not a bad looking horse either. But we were hungry, and we killed the horse. And
wasn't a farmer driving along with it or something, and you took
what?
it? Wasn't there a farmer driving along with it with a cart or something?
Yeah, it was hooked to a cart. I don't think he was a farmer. He was just a guy trying to stay ahead of the Russians, I guess. He drove right into the Americans, and we took his horse and ate it. Which is probably not the thing to do.
That's power.
Well, the green light is it's rolling.
Okay.
Yeah. It says it's rolling.
Okay. Well, they loaded us on the boat. These boats were what they called Liberty ships. They were something that they built quick, like in a hurry during the war, because actually the German submarine bit worked real good. The shipping took a terrible loss. And they had to build ships quick in a hurry in order to get stuff overseas. And they built a pile of these Liberty ships. They weren't all that much of a ship, for what little I know about ships. They weren't very good. But this one was a Liberty ship, a troop ship. In other words, this would have been used transporting troops all through the war. Now, they had what they called troop transport squads on these ships, a bunch of GIs. These ships weren't sailed by the Navy, they were sailed by the Merchant Marines. And these fellows, GIs on the ships, they had to do the cooking and so on and like that, assign us to bunks and get our bedding and one thing, our bunks, they were hammocks. And I don't know how many of us there was on the ship, they were several thousand. Of course, now when they was hauling troops over, most of them troops were the buck privates. These troop transport guys could detail them to all the KP, the clean to keep the ship clean, all the dirty work. Now, we didn't have our stripes on. They hadn't given us any stripes, but we were all non-coms. So they started immediately telling us how they would detail us to all these various odd jobs, and we said, hold the fort. In the Army, you cannot detail non-coms unless it's an emergency, and this was not an emergency. Well, they were highly indignant about it, but in fact, I think one or two of them was threatening court-martial, and court-martial would be damned. We knew we were in our rights. We didn't do any detail. It might have been better if we had. It would sometimes got kind of boring between poker games on the ship. We were 11 days coming back, and the sea was calm. We didn't, it wasn't rough any of the way back. Nothing like that cotton picking North Atlantic going over. It took us 11 days to get back here, and I don't know how many ships there was in convoy. Of course, there were several Navy ships, destroyers, battleships, and so on, sailing guard for the convoy. We pulled into New York City. Man, that Statue of Liberty, you ought to see it. That really looked good. There was tears that day, too. I think I had a few. Well, they loaded us up there on trains. Of course, we were shipped to induction centers, depending upon where you were, or what part of the country you were from. Now, right through the east here, we were shipped to New England boys were shipped to Fort Devens in Massachusetts, because that was an induction center. There we were given your uniforms, our stripes and ribbons and so on. Red Cross had a whole bunch of women there doing sewing and like that. They sewed our stripes on for us and treated us real good. And we were given some money. See, we all been drawing full wages all this while, only we hadn't got them. And I had 13 months coming. Some of them guys had the better part of 3 years coming. They gave us, I think, around $400 or $500 there. Gave us a 60-day furlough and transportation. Aboard the train there, we had to go to New York. They had to get straight on the train. We pulled into New York. We'd been playing poker on the train, and I'd had a little luck. And I had some money there. I had bought a money belt, because I always wore a money belt in the Army. You never knew. And I put part of the money in that money belt. It was a good thing I did, because I got off that train at Pennsylvania Station, walked across the station to the information booth, and walking across there, I get a pocket pinch. It was wall-to-wall people. You was bumping into people all the while. I never felt it. I don't have any idea when it was done. Well, I got trained to Scranton. Another fellow who was from Scranton, he and I rode together, and we got to Scranton. And I was going to bus station, see about a bus mechanic. And he said, well, look, come on home with me. I've got family enough around there. Somebody will take you up. So, of course, he had a lot of rations, so on, living there. So I went to his home, and he and his brother was there. And they brought me home. I got here around 10:30. I guess Mother must have, of course, I was thanking them for bringing me home. I got out of the car or something and so on. She must have heard me something. Because I know I come up on the porch, I banged on the door and came through the door. My folks never kept the door locked, so I knew the doors would be locked. And I was in the house, Mother was coming through the living room. We met there. That was quite a reunion. And of course, Dad got up and down. Grandma didn't. I went up and spoke to Grandma. And then we sat here and talked, Mother and Dad and I. It must have been getting towards 3 o'clock in the morning when I finally asked Dad how many cows he was milking. He said, well, wasn't milking any. So that was the first I knew that the barn had burned in October of 44. They hadn't wrote and told me because of being a prisoner and so on. And they, which I'm just as well pleased that they hadn't told me. That was quite a jolt. Well, of course, I was home the 60 days. And then I was supposed to report back to Miami Beach. That was the Air Force Center. And I went by train to Miami Beach, where I was well, I had drawn, they sent us a check at home. I had drawn practically all my wages, except the last month that I was in the Army. And I drew that pay in Miami Beach there. They gave us, well, I had Purple Heart coming. I'd been wounded. And they brought us all. And there I was discharged from the Army on the 3rd of September of 1945, and I came home, and that was the end of my Army career. Okay, Esther,
where did you get that $300 that was stolen in Pennsylvania Station?
What?
Where did you get that $300 that was stolen in
Well, most of it I won the poker game.
So that's how you were occupying yourself coming.
That's right. Shut it off and let's see if it's working.
I think this one should work okay. I don't know if it's the machine or the tape. Okay.
Now I'm going to put a PS, I guess. I'm going to go clear back before I was shot down and put in a few things that I forgot about. There was one thing that happened. This Jim Mickey, when we were at the base, we used to go into Norwich. They had a Liberty run. It left at 7 o'clock at night and went into the town of Norwich and they went back at 11 o'clock at night. We could get a pass to go into town most any time on that, unless we were alerted to fly. We generally didn't know until the alert generally didn't go up before midnight, but on occasion it did. And there wasn't really a whole lot to do in Norwich because it was just wall-to-wall soldiers, English soldiers, French soldiers, and GIs, wall-to-wall. The dance halls and bar rooms were so crowded you couldn't hardly get in. But we used to go in some. Well, this Jim Mickey, he got to go and they had dog race track there. He got to go into dog races a lot. I went with him 2 times, but I didn't get too excited about it. But he did. He got quite friends with some English people there. And he got all excited one way. He told me that this certain dog was going to run the next week and he couldn't lose. He was a winner. You better come in, Navy, and we'll make a fortune betting on him, yeah. Well, sucker, I went with him. And this dog race, we put on, it was right after payday, unfortunately. Both of us put up most of our month's wages. Now I can see him yet. They were supposed to go around the track twice. Well, this dog was leading, but there was a dog right behind him. And the second time around on the far corner, I don't know what happened, or I don't know if the dogs themselves know what happened, but they come together there somehow and went head over our apple cart. All you could see was legs were flapping. Well, needless to say, the dog did not win. That was quite educational. I don't remember if I ever went to dog races with him again after that. I might have, I don't recall. Oh yeah, another thing, when I was shipped...
Oh, but Dad, wait, what about, you used to always tell him...
What?
You used to tell him you hunted back home.
Oh, my daughter just brought up something. Afterwards, I used to holler at Mickey. Mickey was from Detroit. Of course, I was a farmer. I used to holler, hey, Mick, you know, back home every farmer's got a mongrel dog, and I've seen them dogs chase rabbits through brush heaps and rock heaps and everything else, and I never did see one of them fall down. I remember, you know, holler, shut up, you damn farmer. And then I started telling about a duffel bag experience. When I was shipped from the hospital to the 44th, the station I was to get off at was Shipton, SH. Well, just before that stage, there was a station called Chippenham. And the way the English talk, I never figured out how comes the English people had to immigrate to this country to learn how to speak the English language. The Englishmen over there can't talk English so you can understand it. And I made a mistake. I got off at this Chippenham or whatever it was. And I was walking down, carrying my duffel bag and walking towards the station, and I looked up and I saw this name. It was C-A, and I thought, this is not right. That Shipman was spelled S-H. And there was a guy there, and I told him I was supposed to get off at Shipman. He says, well, that's the next station. And the train was starting to move. You know, I was still limping a little from that foot. And so I started running. There was a boxcar with the door open. He'd see I was limping. He grabbed the barracks bag, and I jumped into the boxcar, and he threw the barracks bag in after me, and I rode to Shipton and got off at Shipton. And there was a truck there, took me to the 24th Bombers. That was kind of stupid, but it happened. Now, I mentioned once about some people, some of the guys having a little trouble with oxygen and passing out. I did once. It wasn't my oxygen mask. It wasn't freeze-up. It was on the Gotha-Raid, and I'd like to mention that Gotha-Raid. The town of Gotha, if I remember, I think we were after a ball bearing factory that day. It was some kind of a factory. I think it was ball bearing. It was right beside of a large lake, and the other side of that lake was woods. That was a long raid, took like 13 hours. We had to carry extra Bombay gas tanks. That meant we could only carry half a load of bombs. We used to hate it when we had to carry extra Bombay tanks, because that meant not only the wing tanks, but the Bombay was half full of high octane. Get a direct flat hit, and boy, you had umpteen amount of gallons of high octane gas to go. There wasn't like that thing was going to get hot quick. Well, anyhow, as I mentioned, the radio op, one of his jobs was watching the bomb get out and watching to see how the stick hit. We dropped the bombs that was another reason for flying formation. The we dropped the bombs all at the same time. That meant that the bomb should go down and strike as the formation was. Well, we missed that town of Gotha by the width of that lake. I don't know how big the lake was, but we blew that patch of woods over there all to hell. I can remember standing there and watching that thing, and I thought, oh, brother, all of this, 13 hours, most of it under oxygen, and all we done was provide the Heinies with a whole bunch of kindling wood. Well, they practically grounded the whole 8th and over that. There was a big stink about that miss. I'm sure we missed other things, but not that far. They probably wound up blaming a tail gunner or something. And on that raid, as I watched the bombs out, I began to feel kind of woozy. And I was down in the bomb bay. The bomb bay came up about to my waist, about my chest. And the flight deck, I was down off the flight deck. And I looked up through the flight deck door, and I could see that my blinker, there's a blinker that we had that the oxygen on, it opened and closed every time you breathe. That was how I knew that Doug Churchill was dead. If he was all slumped over. When I started to pull him out of the turret, I thought he was dead. I looked at his blinker, and it was not blinking, so I knew that Churchill was over. Well, I thought I could watch the stick and see how it exploded and get the bomb bay doors closed and get back up on, we had an extra meter for emergency oxygen, they called it, and get hooked on to that emergency oxygen. By the time I got the doors closed, of course it worked hydraulic. All I had to do was push a button and watch, see if they closed and latch. And I started to crawl back up onto the flight deck. I don't really recall obviously I got up on the flight deck, because the next thing I remember, Ward, the co-pilot, was back there squatted down by me. He had seen me. He said I got up there and flopped onto the flight deck, and he came back and he seen my blinker wasn't working right. He hooked me onto emergency oxygen. As soon as I got oxygen, I come to. I was all right. I had no real effects of it. Now, another thing I didn't mention, as I told when we was coming off of the March the 6th Berlin raid, and we was over the North Sea and lost, except for what my QDNs. Jones and I, of course, were talking back, and the rest of the crew of course, pilot and co-pilot, never knew that we were traveling on a third-class QDN, because we, of course, were on the deck. We took our oxygen masks off. So we didn't have to talk on the intercom. Jonesy and I were talking back and forth just regular. Well, we had to yell over the... But we got those oxygen masks off as soon as we could. They were kind of a pain in the neck. They were quite irritating to wear. And, well, I guess that brings me up to date on the PSs, except for a few things that happened while I was in prison.
Oh, but how did you get your nickname Abe?
Oh, my daughter wants me to tell how I got my nickname Abe. There was that was back in the days of the big bands. Tommy Dorsey, Jimmy Dorsey, Benny Goodman. There was a guy played under the name of Abe Lyman. Abe Lyman and his Dorsey used to play on the radio. He was not as good as the Dorseys and Benny Goodman, so on. But naturally, when I went into the Army with a last name like Lyman, the young guys, John Lyman, are you Abe Lyman Dorkstra? And from that it dwindled into the fact I got the nickname of Baby. I later, from a distant relative of mine, found out how that came about. This Abe Lyman was a Russian Jew that had immigrated to this country. He was a musician and finally got a band of his own. His last name was actually something like Lymanisky, so this fellow said. He thought that was too long. So he took the first 5 letters of his name, which spelled Lyman. And that was what he played under, and that's where I got my nickname, and this distant relative of mine had this nickname of Abe, and he got it from the same place. Now, I did forget about wounds. When I went through that Bombay the day we were shot down, to see about Doug Churchill. I was walking the catwalk. I mentioned I could not get the Bombay doors shut. They opened all right, but they wouldn't shut. I don't know why, but they wouldn't. Of course, we'd been hitting the fighters a couple of times. The time maybe a bullet got to a hydraulic hose or something, I don't know. They wouldn't close. So I had to walk that catwalk. Of course, the bomb racks was on each side, but it was still kind of looking down 20-some thousand feet and nothing between you and the ground. And in the middle of that catwalk, I was hitting the hip with shrapnel, I imagine. Probably a piece of the ship, maybe itself, 20 millimeters. The German bombers, of course, had 20 millimeters, and most of their shells were a fused shell. They hit and exploded. It felt like a hot iron. I never bad enough that anything was done. I don't know, I wadded my handkerchief, kept my handkerchief around there with my belt over it for a few days to keep blood from running around. Johnny Nozzle was hitting the legs with flak on the first, when we were hit with the flak in the first place. I think it was 6-8 holes he got. He'd been hitting the legs before on the Pulaski Royal Field raid, and he was hit again. Both Wormy and Jonesy were hit had shrapnel wounds. Bray was the only man who got out who didn't have any wounds. Of course, the five, Churchill, we know, was dead. And the other four, of course, whether they were wounded, what happened, we never know. I've often wondered all my life. I know those Bombay doors were open, and that's where the other 3 flight deck men would have bailed out. Whatever happened up there, I don't know, but if I'd been there, I assume it would have happened to me. I'm the only flight deck man that was alive, and I wasn't on the flight deck. I was in the back of the ship when we finally went down. And none of us ever went to there was a hospital at the prison, or what a hospital barracks they called it. None of us went to the hospital when we got along all right without them. Now, I did forget when we was in prison, we used to make up plays. A barracks somebody would write a play, and we'd actors, and we'd rig ourselves up and put on a play. Go around the various barracks and put on the play, and other barracks would make up the play and go around. And we had quite a lot of fun at that, and some of them were pretty good. Yeah, I played in one. I played the part of a farmer. And we, somewhere, I suppose, trading cigarettes, I don't know who got it, or something with regards. They got a hold of a few girls' clothes, a dress. They got a dress and a few frills and so on. And we generally have a girl or two in the shows. We'd pick a guy in the barracks who maybe, had with a dress and frilled up this and that. Why, you could make believe he was a girl anyhow. You couldn't have all the plays with all men. And we really had quite a lot of fun at it.
Was it just at Christmas or all the time that you did this?
No, Christmas time was the time, I remember that, because that was when we made a play, our barracks. No, we made up plays at other times besides Christmas times. And I got another thing one morning when the Red Cross parcels hadn't been coming through worth a hoot, and we were pretty hard up for eats, about all we was getting what we got from the Heinies. And one morning there, of course, we got our hot water and a piece of bread, and that was it. And the guys were standing around there, and one guy said, "Boy, what I'd give for ham and eggs." The other guy would want fruit and cereal. Another guy would want pancakes and everything. And I made the remark that right then I was hungry enough. I wish I had a handful of the feed, and my dad would be feeding to his cows that morning. After that, I was always getting ribbed when we were a little hard up for eating, or hollering out, "Hey, Amy, what's your dad feeding these cows today?" Well, I would have given quite a little for a little of that grain. I could have mixed it up with that hot water and drank it. It wouldn't have went too bad. Now, I've got a picture of our crew. And can you see it all right?
No, but I'm about to. Whoa. It's a little bit, it's reflecting the light. Here, I'll see if I can get over there.
Maybe you want me to move.
No, I'll just, well, actually I'm hooked up to the, what am I hooked up to here? This is graceful. There, I think, if you tip it a little bit toward the stairs.
Toward you what?
The stairs. I just have some trouble with the reflection. Where's that reflection coming from? How about if you put it just, yeah, there.
Wait, follow me?
Where are you? I lost it. There we go. I think that'll be better.
Okay. This is Doug Churchill, the man that was killed right off the bat. This is Ray Winkie. He was the tail gunner. We don't know what happened. We know he came through the door. There was a door. He went into the back, the tail turret. He came through that door after the order was given to bail out. We don't know what happened. Maybe he bailed out and his chute didn't open. We don't know. Now, this man is James Dick. He finished his missions before we went down. He was our right waist gunner. Incidentally, he wrote to my parents, I assume the other four guys, their parents, after we were shot down. He finished his missions, and John Nozzle took his place. So this would be John Nozzle, and he lived. He made it. This is Bob Bray, the left waist gunner. He, of course, made it. Myself. This is Clemens, the engineer, the other flight deck man. He was lost. This is Wormy Nealon. He was the bombardier. He made it. This is Ray Townsend, the pilot. He didn't make it. This is Doug Ward. He was a co-pilot. He didn't make it. This is Paul Jones, the navigator. Of course, he made it. These two men here and us two were the flight deck men. And of course, I'm the only one that made it. Okay.
Okay. You wanted to tell about how you've gotten back in touch with them over the years, the ones that survived?
Okay.
Yeah, very good. That's where I was here.
It's running now, is it?
It's running. I have to make sure you're still... Oh, yeah. There you are. Yep.
I never have seen any of the four other except Wormy. I saw him. He came to my place about 15 years after we were out of the Army. He was a traveling salesman at the time. He came through Mashai. He recognized the name Mashafin and stopped at my brother-in-law's store, incidentally, and inquired where it was. And he came here and visited me. He's the only one I've ever seen. He and I have hit and miss through the years, sent cards and so on, back and forth. I didn't hear from any of the others when Paul Jones, a few years ago, he and I wrote back and forth a little. I wrote in a letter the other day. I haven't got any answer to it yet. And then I got a thing from the prison, the reunion bit of the prison of Stalag 17B, and they had the names, all of them they knew, of the men who were still living and those who were gone, and their addresses. And I saw Bob Bray's name and address in there. And I wrote to him, and he wrote back, and for the past year, he and I have corresponded more or less. Of course, Nozzle, I never did hear from Nozzle. I heard through Wormy that he died. And Wormy is now dead. He died the 7th of December of 93. So they three of us at this time still living. Now, whether this will be, I wonder, of interest to any of my descendants 50, 100 years from now, I don't know. I kind of hope so.
It's a story of an old grandfather along the line whose army life during the Second World War. If I had it all to do over, I guess probably I'd do it the same way. I'm sure they'd have won the war if I hadn't have enlisted in the Air Force. It might have taken a little longer, but I guess probably they'd have made it. I have thought that I know that I had ancestors in the Revolution and the Civil War. Were it possible to listen to a tape of their experiences, I would like to do it, but that is not possible. Hopefully this will be of some interest to some of you descendants that I'll never see. I'll be gone before you're born. I guess that's it.
Well, what about your April 8th? Has anything ever happened on
yes,
April 8th?
my daughter wants me to mention. We shipped out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, the 8th of April of 43. I was shot down over enemy territory on April the 8th of 44. I was marched out of prison in Germany on April the 8th of 45. I swore if I ever got back home on the 8th of April, I'd go stay in bed. Well, I never did.
And let's see, some of the things you brought back with you, besides, of course, your wings and so on. You had the spoon that you used in prison, and you had your watch, and the gun that the German...
Oh, yes, my darling. I brought back the spoon. I didn't have to save my cup. I brought back the spoon that I had in prison, and some emblems off an officer's hat that I took away from him. That I gave him my skull cap that I had to wear. But I took his cap, but I only got back with the emblems off of it. And I brought back a gun. It was a pistol. It's about a 25 caliber pistol, I'd say. The commandant of our compound war. Now, I did not liberate that. Wormy Nealon did. When the soldier boys were disarming the guards and so on, showing the guns down the heap, Wormy the squirrel, he grabbed that pistol. I won it from him in a blackjack game on the boat coming home. I have that pistol yet. I'm going to leave it to my youngest daughter. My middle daughter has my watch that I got through with, and my uniform, my A2 jacket, and such things. The girls can divide up as they want when I'm gone. I have a little 2 German marks that I brought back, money. Few things like that. My prison dog tag. I guess that's it.
But we still forgot the motorcycle.
Oh, my daughter keeps bringing up. She wants me to tell about a motorcycle that we liberated right after we were retaking the Patton's Army. I always kind of liked to ride motorcycles. We were down by this dash house, as I mentioned. There was a guy come along with this motorcycle. I don't know what he was, but we thought we needed the motorcycle. So I took the motorcycle and rode around there. I was one day there. I rode around a lot till the thing ran out of gas. So then I left it there beside the road where we got it. I guess probably he picked it up. I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, I guess that's
Well, let's see if the thing plays this time.